He thought he could humiliate the janitor without consequence, but when she took the microphone, the room fell into stunned silence, and his world started to crumble. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, its golden rays stretching through the tall glass windows of the Silverstone Grand Hall. Shadows fell like silent fingers across the polished marble floors, reflecting the glow of chandeliers that glittered, like stars just beginning to emerge. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, but inside, time seemed to slow, wrapped in the careful elegance of a world crafted for celebration and status. It was the annual Sterling Tech Company Gala, a spectacle, reserved for the highest in ranks, the most loyal in service, and those lucky enough to earn an invitation. Waiters moved like whispers between silk dresses and tailored suits, balancing crystal flutes of champagne on silver trays. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, ambition, and something more subtle: expectation. The hall pulsed with energy, but beneath the laughter and clinking glasses lay an unspoken hierarchy. Executives stood in clusters near the stage, their laughter a little louder, their movements a little more relaxed, as though they owned not just the space, but the people within it. Lower-level employees stayed closer to the edges, exchanging polite nods and cautious smiles, eyes always flickering toward the center where power gathered like heat. In the far corner of the hall, where the light didn't quite reach and the flowers on the buffet table had begun to wilt slightly, a woman moved quietly, almost invisibly. Her uniform, a crisp navy blue janitorial jumpsuit, stood in stark contrast to the glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos that surrounded her. Yet she wore it with a certain quiet pride. Her name was Lena. Middle-aged, perhaps in her late 50s, Lena carried herself with a calm, deliberate grace. Her dark skin glowed softly in the fading sunlight, and her short, coiled hair was tucked beneath a plain cap. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, moved with practiced efficiency as she wiped fingerprints from a glass display near the dessert table. There was something in her presence that drew the eye, even as she worked to stay unnoticed. Maybe it was her eyes, gentle but observant, like she was always seeing more than she let on. No one spoke to her. No one really looked at her. And yet, Lena watched everything. She moved from table to table, adjusting a folded napkin here, straightening a misplaced chair there. She lingered near the large flower arrangement by the entrance, tucking back a stray petal with the care of someone who appreciated beauty in small, forgotten things. From the corner of the room, she had the perfect view. She saw the new interns, young, nervous, overdressed, huddled near the back trying not to spill their drinks. She saw the executive team laughing a little too hard at the CEO's latest anecdote. She saw the vice president slip a waiter a folded bill and whisper something behind a smile. Every detail, every movement Lena noticed, tucked away like puzzle pieces she'd been collecting for years. A small girl, perhaps a server's daughter helping out for the night, passed by and accidentally bumped into Lena. The girl looked up. Startled, Lena smiled gently and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. Her voice was warm, soothing, like honey in tea. "Just keep your eyes up and your heart steady." The girl blinked, nodded, and scurried away. If anyone had asked, no one would have remembered Lena being there. She blended into the background by design. Not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned long ago the power of observation over attention. At the far end of the room, the stage stood ready for speeches and applause. A sleek podium gleamed under soft lights, awaiting the night's speakers. A banner stretched overhead. Sterling Tech, a future built on excellence. Beneath it, a dozen executives rehearsed their talking points, checking their watches and murmuring about investor impressions and media coverage. Lena paused as she passed the edge of the stage. Her fingers brushed the wood of the podium briefly, then pulled back. Her eyes lingered on it for a second too long. The music swelled as a jazz quartet began playing softly near the bar. Laughter rose again, louder now. The sky outside turned amber. The mood lifted with the shifting light, but the separation between people remained as clear as the lines on the polished floor. Lena resumed her cleaning, carefully retrieving a dropped napkin, straightening a silver tray that had shifted slightly. No one thanked her. No one asked why she was there. No one questioned what stories she might carry behind that quiet smile and work-worn uniform. But Lena didn't mind. She had always known that some of the most powerful people in the room were the ones no one noticed. And tonight, oh, tonight would prove just how much they had underestimated her. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, its golden rays stretching through the tall glass windows of the Silverstone Grand Hall. Shadows fell like silent fingers across the polished marble floors, reflecting the glow of chandeliers that glittered, like stars just beginning to emerge. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, but inside, time seemed to slow, wrapped in the careful elegance of a world crafted for celebration and status. It was the annual Sterling Tech Company Gala, a spectacle, reserved for the highest in ranks, the most loyal in service, and those lucky enough to earn an invitation. Waiters moved like whispers between silk dresses and tailored suits, balancing crystal flutes of champagne on silver trays. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, ambition, and something more subtle, expectation. The hall pulsed with energy, but beneath the laughter and clinking glasses lay an unspoken hierarchy. Executives stood in clusters near the stage, their laughter a little louder, their movements a little more relaxed, as though they owned not just the space, but the people within it. Lower-level employees stayed closer to the edges, exchanging polite nods and cautious smiles, eyes always flickering toward the center where power gathered like heat. In the far corner of the hall, where the light didn't quite reach and the flowers on the buffet table had begun to wilt slightly, a woman moved quietly, almost invisibly. Her uniform, a crisp navy blue janitorial jumpsuit, stood in stark contrast to the glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos that surrounded her. Yet she wore it with a certain quiet pride. Her name was Lena. Middle-aged, perhaps in her late 50s, Lena carried herself with a calm, deliberate grace. Her dark skin glowed softly in the fading sunlight, and her short, coiled hair was tucked beneath a plain cap. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, moved with practiced efficiency as she wiped fingerprints from a glass display near the dessert table. There was something in her presence that drew the eye, even as she worked to stay unnoticed. Maybe it was her eyes, gentle but observant, like she was always seeing more than she let on. No one spoke to her. No one really looked at her. And yet, Lena watched everything. She moved from table to table, adjusting a folded napkin here, straightening a misplaced chair there. She lingered near the large flower arrangement by the entrance, tucking back a stray petal with the care of someone who appreciated beauty in small, forgotten things. From the corner of the room, she had the perfect view. She saw the new interns, young, nervous, overdressed, huddled near the back, trying not to spill their drinks. She saw the executive team laughing a little too hard at the CEO's latest anecdote. She saw the vice president slip a waiter a folded bill and whisper something behind a smile. Every detail, every movement, Lena noticed, tucked away like puzzle pieces she'd been collecting for years. A small girl, perhaps. A server's daughter helping out for the night passed by and accidentally bumped into Lena. The girl looked up, startled. Lena smiled gently and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. Her voice was warm, soothing, like honey and tea. "Just keep your eyes up and your heart steady." The girl blinked, nodded, and scurried away. If anyone had asked, no one would have remembered Lena being there. She blended into the background by design, not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned, long ago, the power of observation over attention. The buzz in the room shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the moment before a storm rolls in. A subtle tightening of posture, a hush that skimmed over the crowd like a breeze over water. Glasses were quietly set down, conversations paused, and all heads turned, because he had arrived. Mr. Jonathan Harrington, CEO of Sterling Tech, strode through the entrance to the main hall, with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the most important person in the room. He wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that shimmered under the chandelier lights, crisp lines cutting across his broad shoulders. A sapphire tie, the exact shade of the company logo, sat perfectly centered beneath a silver tie clip engraved with his initials, JH. His hair, thick and silver with just the right amount of effortless style, was swept back from a smooth, tanned forehead. He smiled, not warmly, but with the precision of someone who had practiced it in mirrors for years. Behind him, a small entourage of executives followed like obedient satellites, laughing at unspoken jokes and glancing at one another for cues. Harrington made his way to the stage without a pause, every step echoing slightly across the marble floor. A young intern, barely out of college, scurried ahead to hand him a wireless microphone. The CEO took it with a nod that dismissed more than it acknowledged. Then the lights dimmed, and the music softened. Harrington stepped forward, adjusting the mic with a practiced flick. He scanned the room, his room, and began to speak. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and amplified. "To the brilliant minds, tireless innovators, and exceptional leaders who make sterling tech what it is today." There was a polite round of applause. Someone whooped from the back a little too eagerly. He continued, voice rising in tempo, rich with corporate bravado. "In just 5 short years, we've quadrupled our market presence, expanded into 3 continents, and disrupted the very industries. People said we're untouchable. And why? Because we dared to think bigger, we dared to lead." More applause, louder this time. He launched into metrics, graphs no one could see but that everyone was supposed to admire. Revenue curves, user acquisition, rates efficiency models. Words like synergy and scalability floated in the air like expensive cologne. But something was missing. People. Not once did he mention the hands who built the products, answered the support calls, cleaned the offices, or worked double shifts to keep things running during lean years. There was no talk of community, of shared mission or gratitude beyond a general nod to hard work across all levels. It was clear who he was there to impress, and who didn't matter, and Lena knew. From her quiet post near the buffet, she listened while polishing a silver tray, gently turning it beneath a cloth until it gleamed like a mirror. She heard every word, every line rehearsed to impress, every omission that spoke louder than what was said. The speech ended with a sweeping declaration. "The future is ours to command. Let's lead it." Thunderous applause followed. Champagne. Glasses clinked. The jazz band struck up again, this time with a livelier tempo. Harrington stepped down from the stage, surrounded immediately by admirers. Executives moved closer to be seen. Interns hovered, hoping to be noticed. A few tried to ask questions, but Harrington was already scanning the room, a shark in a silk tie, always hunting the next opportunity to assert dominance. Then he spotted. Helena was still by the buffet, now arranging a stack of polished dessert spoons. She worked with her usual calm, eyes lowered, expression unreadable. For a moment, Harrington squinted. Something about her posture, maybe her presence, nagged at the back of his mind. But the thought passed quickly. Instead, he saw an opportunity. With a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, he turned to his entourage and raised his voice. "Well, well," he said, loud enough to turn heads nearby. "I didn't realize the guest list was so inclusive this year. Even the janitorial staff gets to enjoy the hors d'oeuvres." Laughter erupted around him, sharp, performative, uncomfortable. A few executives chuckled out of habit. The one young woman's smile faltered as she glanced at Lena, then quickly looked away. A man near the bar frowned but said nothing. The music seemed to dull for a second, as though even the instruments were unsure whether to keep playing. Lena looked up, meeting Harrington's gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Instead, she gave a small, respectful nod and returned to polishing the tray. Slow, steady, deliberate. Her silence spoke volumes. And yet Harrington, blind to nuance and bloated with pride, took it as submission. He turned away, already bored, already seeking someone more important. But others had seen, and though they said nothing, a few eyes lingered on Lena a little longer. A flicker of something passed between them. Uncertainty, maybe guilt, and still Lena worked just as she always had. But inside her, something stirred, because tonight the masks were beginning to slip, and when the time came, it would not be her who was caught unprepared. The gala carried on into the early evening, growing louder with each passing hour. The golden light outside shifted to a soft amber, then faded into dusk. The city skyline beyond the towering windows began to shimmer against the deepening sky, while inside the grand hall the atmosphere became heavier with wine, pride, and whispered ambitions. And still, Lena remained, quiet, steady, and watching. She moved like someone who belonged in every room yet claimed no attention. Her uniform, still neat despite the evening's work, bore a name tag that read simply, Lena. No last name, no title, just that. But to anyone watching closely, there was more to her than the fabric of that uniform. As she passed between tables, refilling water pitchers and tidying stray napkins, she received a nod, brief but unmistakably respectful, from an older man seated near the far wall. He was one of the few not engaged in conversation or performance. His white hair was combed back, his suit dark and simple compared to the flash around him. A former board member, Mr. Calloway, if memory served. The moment passed quickly. Most wouldn't have noticed, but one nearby intern did. He blinked, surprised. "Do you two know her?" he asked the older man. Calloway gave a faint smile, eyes still on Lena. "I knew someone very much like her once," he said, almost to himself. Then he returned to sipping his drink, as though the conversation was over before it began. Lena continued on, unaffected, as if she hadn't noticed the exchange. Later, by the kitchen doors, a younger employee, nervous and clearly new, offered to help her lift a heavy tray of used glassware. "I can get that for you, ma'am," he said, reaching for it. Lena paused and looked at him, her eyes warm but firm. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her voice smooth and precise, with the kind of diction that caught people off guard. "But I've carried heavier things than this in my life, responsibility among them." The young man blinked. Her tone wasn't arrogant. It was thoughtful, calm, as though each word had been carefully chosen. It didn't fit the uniform. It didn't match the assumptions. Yes, of course," he stammered. "Sorry, I didn't mean to imply." "You didn't," she said, offering a small smile. "But thank you for your kindness." And just like that, she walked away, leaving the employee staring after her as though unsure of what just happened. The mystery deepened. Near the back of the hall, where a collection of company memorabilia had been arranged for display, a small group of guests wandered, sipping wine and reading plaques. There were old product prototypes encased in glass, faded newspaper articles from the company's early breakthroughs, and photos, so many photos, capturing moments from Sterling Tech's ascent. One frame in particular stood out. It was larger than the rest, lined with brushed silver, and displayed a black and white image from decades ago. A group of 5 people stood arm in arm in front of a small building, their faces alight with pride and hope. The plaque below read, "Visionaries Behind the Foundation, Sterling Tech Year 1. There they were, the original founders, younger, full of promise. 3 men, 2 women, but one of them, one woman in the photo, drew attention more than the others. Her eyes, her smile, the tilt of her head. A woman with radiant brown skin, high cheekbones, and a confidence that leapt out from the image even across time. It was her, Lena, or someone who looked exactly like her, just decades younger. Several people paused at the photo. A few frowned, puzzled, glancing toward the kitchen where Lena had just exited with another tray. One of the guests leaned in closer to the photo, studying the names engraved beneath. There was Jonathan Harrington, fresh-faced and standing taller than the rest. There was Marcus Blythe, Elaine Ruiz, Daniel Calloway, and last, Dr. Lena Walker. The name rang softly through the air. Dr. Lena Walker. Not a custodian, not a cleaner, a doctor, a founder. Whispers began, quiet and cautious, as if speaking too. Loudly might disturb the illusion. Was it really her? Could it be? Why would someone like that, someone who helped create Sterling Tech, be walking around in a janitor's uniform? No one had answers, only questions, and clues that were too strange to dismiss. But Lena gave no indication that anything had changed. As she passed by the display a moment later, her eyes briefly flicked to the photo, but she didn't stop. She simply straightened a chair near the wall and adjusted a stray glass on a high table. Only one person watched her the entire time, Mr. Calloway. He didn't smile. He didn't nod again. He simply watched. Outside, the sky turned a deeper blue. Inside, the party wore on, louder now, more chaotic. And yet, beneath it all, something was beginning to unravel. Because Lena wasn't just a janitor. She was a puzzle, slowly revealing itself. A name forgotten or perhaps erased. A legacy hidden beneath the dust and noise of ego. And soon, everyone would remember who she truly was. By the time twilight draped itself over the city skyline, the grand hall of Sterling Tech's annual gala shimmered under soft, golden chandeliers. Waiters moved like shadows between tables. Music pulsed gently in the background, and laughter, now, slightly slurred from wine, rose and fell like waves. Mr. Harrington stood near the head table, swirling a crystal glass of scotch in his hand, surrounded by admirers. His face was lit by a self-satisfied glow, eyes half-lidded as he nodded along to a story someone was telling about market shares or mergers. Though he clearly wasn't listening, his mind was elsewhere, on his legacy, on his reputation, on how, well, the evening had gone. And then the music cut out. The lights dimmed slightly, not dramatically, just enough to hush the room with curiosity. A soft chime echoed through the speakers, and a spotlight swung gently toward the stage. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped up to the microphone at center stage. He was unfamiliar to most, a representative from the venue or perhaps from corporate communications. He tapped the mic once. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm and clear. "Before we conclude this evening, we have a special moment planned." The room shifted. Heads turned. Conversations paused. We are honored to introduce a surprise keynote speaker, a visionary, a name that helped shape not just this company's success, but its very soul. A person whose legacy most of us stand upon, often without even realizing it. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Harrington raised an eyebrow, his smirk deepening. He leaned toward one of his executives and whispered, "It's probably some washed-up motivational speaker or a LinkedIn influencer." A few chuckles followed. Glasses clinked. "Please welcome," the host continued, "one of the original founders of Sterling Tech, Dr. Lena Walker." Silence. A silence so sudden and complete it almost rang. Harrington's smirk froze. His fingers clenched just slightly around his glass. "What?" someone whispered. From the far side of the room, near the buffet line where she had quietly worked all night, Lena stepped forward. Her stride was slow but steady, calm but commanding. Her janitor's coat still hung from her shoulders, a symbol of invisibility she had worn like armor. But as she walked toward the stage, she slipped it off in one fluid motion, folding it over her arm, before handing it to a stunned staff member at the edge of the platform. Beneath the coat was a simple, elegant navy blue dress, modest, timeless. The kind of dress that didn't shout but spoke with quiet dignity. Around her neck, a thin gold chain glinted in the stage light. Her posture was upright, regal. The crowd parted for her without being asked. Some gasped aloud, others simply stared, mouths open, minds racing to make sense of what they were seeing. A woman who had spent the evening clearing dishes. A woman, mocked, overlooked, dismissed, now ascending the stage to applause that hadn't yet begun, but would. Mr. Harrington didn't move. His color drained slowly, as if his pride was bleeding out of him in silence. Lena reached the podium and adjusted the microphone with grace. For a heartbeat, she looked out at the sea of faces. She saw recognition dawning in some, disbelief in others. She saw Calloway watching from the back with a small, knowing smile. Then she spoke. "Good evening." Her voice was calm and resonant, the same voice she'd used earlier in the hallway, only now it filled the entire room with authority. "My Name is Dr. Lena Walker. I am one of the 5 original founders of Sterling Tech. Decades ago, I helped build this company from a single-room office and a shared dream. We didn't have money, we didn't have connections, but we had vision, and we had each other. Stunned hush, she went on, not bitterly, but with gentle precision. I left the company during its expansion phase, by choice. Not because I lacked the skill to keep up, but because I believed in serving differently. I believed that leadership wasn't about position, it was about presence. She paused, letting that sit. I've watched from the margins. I've swept the floors of the company I helped create, and I've listened. Not to profits or market trends, but to people. The room was still. You could hear the rustle of her dress as she shifted. I wanted to see if the spirit we founded, this company on, still lived within these walls. If compassion, humility, and inclusion were still part of the equation. Lena's gaze turned, calm, pointed, to where Harrington stood, pale and silent. And what I witnessed tonight speaks volumes. She didn't name him, she didn't have to. Around the room, a quiet discomfort settled in. People avoided Harrington's eyes. Few executives took slow steps back. But, Lena said gently, this isn't a speech about shame. It's about remembering. She lifted her chin slightly. Remember where you came from. Remember who helped you get here. And above all, remember, no title makes you better, and no uniform makes you less. Then, as gracefully as she had arrived, she stepped back from the podium. The applause began uncertainly. One pair of hands, then another. Then it spread like fire, thunderous, genuine, unstoppable. Lena offered a quiet nod in response, then stepped down from the stage, walking not with triumph but with quiet peace. She was no longer invisible, and the world finally saw her. The applause still echoed when Lena stepped back to the microphone, hands resting lightly on the podium. But this time the hush came faster, expectant, reverent, as though the room itself was holding its breath. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone demanded attention. My name, she began, is Dr. Lena Walker. The room fell even stiller, if such a thing was possible. It was one thing to see her. It was another to hear the name. The full name spoken aloud, confirmed beyond speculation. I am one of the original 5 who founded Sterling Tech, she continued. Before the skyscrapers, before the IPO, before the buzzwords and boardrooms. Back when we had desks made of plywood and dreams stitched together with duct tape and faith. A quiet ripple of laughter moved through the room, but this time it was warm, respectful. Lena took a breath, her hands clasped gently in front of her. I stepped away from the board more than 2 decades ago, not because I was pushed out, not because I lost interest, but because I believed something more important needed tending. My family, my health, my spirit. And I trusted that the seeds we'd planted would grow the right way. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, not accusing, not bitter, but searching. But lately, she said, her voice quieter now, I've heard things. A tension returned to the air. Stories, whispers, the kind that don't show up on quarterly reports, the kind you only hear if you listen below the numbers. And so, I came back, quietly, in uniform. Gasps and murmurs rippled once more. A few people looked at one another with wide eyes, now remembering conversations they had had near her. What had they said? What had she heard? I've worked among the night shift, mopped the floors of executive offices, polished silver platters for parties like this one. And in those quiet spaces, I've seen the company's soul laid bare. Her eyes didn't accuse, but they uncovered. I watched how some people greet only those they believe can help them. Rise, she said. How they speak differently to a CEO than to a janitor. I've watched kindness treated as weakness and arrogance celebrated as leadership. She let those words settle. The silence that followed was no longer respectful. It was heavy. And let me be clear, Lena added, lifting her chin. This company was built on 3 things: equality, respect, and service. We believed that no one stood above another, only beside. That an idea could come from a technician just as powerfully as from a boardroom. That integrity would always matter more than image. Her voice did not rise, but its strength deepened. And yet what I've seen is that something has shifted. Something subtle but dangerous. She glanced across the crowd, and for the briefest moment, just a flicker, her eyes fell on Mr. Harrington. He stiffened, glass still frozen in his hand. His face remained expressionless, but his jaw clenched just slightly. The crowd followed, her gaze. But she didn't speak his name. She didn't have to. "I am not here to humiliate anyone," she said, turning her attention back to the hole. "I am here to remind you." Another pause. Calculated, human. Remind you that titles are temporary, that wealth, prestige, and public admiration can vanish in a blink. What remains, what always remains, is how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Somewhere in the room, someone let out a breath, sharp, like they'd been holding it too long. "I came back not to take anything," Lena said gently. "Not a position, not power. I don't need a corner office, I don't need my name in lights." Her voice softened, her eyes distant for a moment. "I just needed to know that the house we built is still standing." She took a long breath. "I see cracks now, but I also see hope. I see the young man who helped me carry a tray tonight, not because he knew who I was, but because he saw a human being in need. I see old friends in the back who never forgot where we came from. And I see some of you tonight, realizing that maybe it's time to rebuild." Her hand touched her heart. "If this company is to survive, truly survive, it must remember its roots, not just in story or archive photos, but in action, in humility, in leadership that listens more than it speaks." There was no applause yet. No one dared break the silence. Lena stood for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "I thank you for listening," she said, her voice now almost a whisper. "And I hope, truly, that you remember." With that, she stepped back once more, leaving the microphone gently swaying behind her. And for a second, just one, the entire room remained frozen in awe. Then the applause came, not scattered this time, but full, rising, unstoppable. The kind of applause that doesn't just celebrate, but acknowledges. People stood, some out of respect, others out of shame. And in the far corner, Harrington lowered his eyes, not from the lights, but from something heavier. The truth had been spoken, and it could not be unheard. The final notes of Lena's words lingered in the air like smoke, soft, invisible, but impossible to ignore. For a heartbeat, the entire room stood still, suspended in the gravity of what had just been said. Then, like a floodgate breaking open, applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, obligatory kind that follows most corporate speeches. It was thunderous, raw, earned. People rose from their seats, some slowly, as though shaken awake, others with the urgency of sudden clarity. A few clapped with tears glistening in their eyes, blinking rapidly as though they hadn't expected to feel so much tonight. Even the younger interns, who had only known Lena as the quiet woman sweeping halls, stood now in open-mouthed reverence, a kind of silent apology written across their faces. Near the front of the room, Mr. Harrington remained seated at first. His fingers tapped uncertainly against his glass. When he finally joined the applause, it was mechanical, hollow. He clapped, too late and too soft, his smile brittle at the edges. He glanced around and saw no one looking back at him the way they used to. The respect that had once clung to his name like a tailored suit had begun to loosen, thread by thread, unraveling in silence, not by force, but by truth. Lena stepped down from the stage, with the same quiet dignity that had carried her up. No victory dance, no smug expression, no glance back for validation. A few reporters tried to approach her, cameras in hand, mics extended. "Dr. Walker, just one question. How long have you been working undercover? Why not reclaim your position on the board? but Lena simply held up a gentle hand. "Tonight isn't about me," she said softly, stepping aside. "It's about us, it always was." She moved back toward the service area, past linen-covered tables and flickering candles, past executives who parted for her this time, not out of condescension but respect, past guests who suddenly found it hard to meet her gaze, not because of shame she had cast upon them, but because of the shame they now saw in themselves. Back in the shadowed wings of the venue, Lena retrieved her overcoat from the same staff member she had handed it to earlier. He offered it to her now with both hands, as if presenting a queen with a robe. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm. Then, with sleeves rolled and no fuss, she resumed helping clean up. She gathered glasses, stacked plates, tied trash bags with quick, practiced hands, the same way she had for weeks. The same way she always had, when one of the younger servers rushed to stop her. "Please, Dr. Walker, you shouldn't." She just smiled. "I'm not above this," she replied. "That's the whole point." From the main hall, the sound of murmured conversation returned, but it was changed now, softer, more thoughtful. People no longer stood in huddles of hierarchy, but in circles of reflection. For the first time all evening, some executives spoke to dishwashers, managers thanked servers, and somewhere near the back, a few employees sat together, upper and lower tier, sharing quiet words that had nothing to do with metrics or margins. And above it all, Lena's final words still echoed in the marble and glass, like scripture etched into the very architecture. "Greatness is not measured by how high you rise, but by how well you lift others as you climb." They were repeated in whispers. Some wrote it down. Others simply held it in their hearts, letting it stir something long asleep. Mr. Harrington remained at his table, posture stiffer than usual, his drink untouched. His entourage had thinned, some feigning phone calls, others pretending to suddenly remember urgent tasks. He watched Lena from afar, his jaw working as if caught between apology and pride. But he said nothing. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he still didn't know how. As the gala slowly wound down, guests filtered out beneath the velvet dusk, leaving behind only flickering lights and the faint scent of roses and wine. The golden warmth of sunset had long given way to the cooler hush of night. Inside, Lena continued to help tidy up, trading gentle smiles with the staff she now called friends. She never asked for acknowledgement. She never expected applause. She had come to see if the heart of the company still beat, and tonight maybe it had begun to pulse again. By midnight, the hall was nearly empty. Only a handful remained. Cleaners, coordinators, and Lena, quietly folding a linen napkin with the same care one might give to a sacred text. She turned one last time to glance at the now empty stage, the place where truth had found a microphone. Then, without fanfare, she stepped into the night, not as a janitor, not as a founder, but as a woman who had always understood something far deeper than status, that the measure of a person is not found in how they rise above others, but in how they bend to lift others with grace. And that real power doesn't come from a title, it comes from character.